The sun had just begun to rise over the airport. It was quiet, peaceful, and cold inside the terminal. Near Gate 37, Ibrahim Traoré waited calmly. No suit, no bodyguards, nothing flashy. To most, he looked like just another traveler from West Africa. But this was no ordinary man. This was Ibrahim Traoré, the President of Burkina Faso. He preferred to travel this way. Humble, private, unannounced. No press entourage, no grand displays. Just a quiet return from a diplomatic trip to Europe where he had discussed critical issues, gold sovereignty, Africa's future, economic independence. Now all he wanted was to go home. As he approached the Air France flight bound for Ouagadougou, he greeted an airport worker in French with a warm smile. Bonjour, ça va? The worker smiled back, unaware of who he was speaking to. That's exactly how Traoré liked it. He boarded quietly, nodding politely to the flight crew, and took his seat in business class, 2A by the window. No one noticed, or so he thought. A few rows back, whispers were already starting. A senior French businessman, a CEO of a major energy conglomerate, was also scheduled to be on that flight. He was accustomed to first-class treatment, red carpets, champagne, VIP lounges. But when he arrived at the gate, the airline informed him that business class was full. The CEO wasn't pleased. "I'm a strategic partner in multiple African projects," he said, tapping his polished shoes impatiently as assistants hovered nearby. To him, that meant rules didn't apply. He demanded a seat upgrade. The gate agents scrambled. They checked manifests, whispered among themselves, and refreshed their tablets. But the reality was simple. Business class was at capacity. Still, the CEO refused to accept no. That's when Air France called in a senior flight attendant to resolve the situation. She arrived moments later, tall, white, sharp-eyed, her name tag read Claire. With a perfectly practiced smile, she stepped onto the plane, her eyes scanning the business cabin like a security camera. Her gaze stopped at seat 2A. A dark-skinned man in a plain hoodie sat quietly, scrolling on his phone. She looked again. No designer luggage, no entourage, no signs of importance. She leaned toward another attendant and whispered, "Probably a mistake." Then she approached. "Monsieur, may I see your boarding pass?" she asked, her tone polite but clipped. Traoré looked up, nodded calmly, and handed it to her. The seat number was correct. Everything checked out. Still, something in her body language shifted. Uneasy, doubtful. Moments later, she returned, this time with a different tone. Still smiling, but tighter. "Sir, I'm sorry, but we may need to move you to economy to accommodate another passenger. You'll, of course, be compensated." The insult was quiet, but sharp. Traoré raised an eyebrow. "And why me?" he asked, his voice even. "No reason, sir. Just a small operational adjustment for another guest." "A guest more important than me?" he asked, still calm. She didn't answer, just smiled. Around them, a few passengers had started to notice. A laptop was closed, a newspaper lowered, the energy shifted, but no one said a word. Traoré simply leaned back in his seat and replied, "Non, I will remain in my seat." Claire froze. No? From a man like him? She wasn't used to hearing that. Especially not from an African passenger, especially not with that calm defiance. Her smile faded slightly. "Sir, I insist, this is for operational reasons," she said, her tone colder now. Traoré didn't flinch. "Then please explain why I've been selected. There are others in this cabin." Claire hesitated. She hadn't prepared for resistance, not like this. More eyes were on them now. A few rows back, someone shifted uncomfortably. Another passenger glanced over the seat divider. Something wasn't right. But still, no one spoke. Meanwhile, the CEO was still at the gate, refusing to board, until a seat was made available. Claire rushed to the cockpit, whispered to the captain, and returned moments later, with a new strategy. This time, she didn't approach Traoré. She went to another black passenger in business class, then another. Her pattern was unmistakable, and that was her second mistake. Traoré sat silently, watching, no emotion on his face, but his mind was razor sharp. He saw what was happening. He wasn't angry. He was focused. Then, Claire pointed to a young African man, likely in his late 20s. Confused, the man looked up as she said, "Sir, we need you to move." "Economy?" Claire said flatly. The young man blinked, confused. "Why, me?" She didn't answer, just took his boarding pass without eye contact. That's when Ibrahim Traoré stood up. "Enough," he said. His voice was calm, but it carried weight, the kind that turns a room quiet. "You're making decisions based on skin color, not tickets. That's called discrimination." Claire froze, a flicker of unease flashing across her face. "Sir?" "I'll have to ask you to sit down. Please don't cause a scene." He held her gaze, steady and unshaken. There was something in his eyes, composed, fearless, unmovable. She faltered for a second, but still didn't recognize who he truly was. To her, he was just another African man being difficult. She turned away, lips pressed thin, fury simmering just below the surface. These people. Always making noise, she muttered under her breath in French. Moments later, the French CEO was finally escorted aboard. Claire greeted him with extra care, champagne in hand, smiling wide. "We're resolving the seating issue, monsieur," she said, practically bowing. Back in 2A, Traoré sat down, buckled his seatbelt, and rested his hand on the armrest. He didn't say another word. He didn't need to. Soon, everyone would know what had just happened, and who, exactly, they had tried to humiliate. The CEO strutted past him like royalty returning to his throne, without so much as a glance. Claire flitted around him, adjusting his seat, offering towels, laughing at his jokes. The message was clear: you matter. That man does not. As the plane taxied down the runway, no one noticed the tension simmering in business class. Everything appeared normal. Passengers relaxed, lights dimmed, champagne poured. But something was building. Quiet, heavy, inevitable. Traoré didn't raise his voice, didn't flash a badge, didn't call security. He simply watched, calm and silent, like a man who already knew how this movie would end. Mid-flight, Claire returned to his row with a forced smile. "Would you like something to drink, sir?" He looked at her. "Water is fine." She nodded quickly and walked away. No apology, no recognition, no respect. Meanwhile, the CEO was basking in attention. Claire leaned in when he spoke, laughing at his arrogance as he boasted, "Burkina Faso is lucky we're involved. We're bringing order to chaos." Claire nodded, oblivious to the irony. 2 rows away, the man he was insulting was Burkina Faso. A woman nearby, a nurse returning home, shook her head and whispered to her neighbor, "That's our president. They don't even know who they're disrespecting." The neighbor's eyes widened, but said nothing. The president clearly didn't want attention, and no one wanted to break the silence. Hours passed. The plane glided over West Africa. Most passengers slept, but Ibrahim Traoré stayed awake, staring out the window at the clouds. Not angry, just patient. And when the wheels finally touched down in Ouagadougou, that patience turned to power. As the aircraft descended, cabin lights flickered on. The captain announced their approach in French and English. Passengers stirred, stretched, prepared to disembark. Claire walked through the aisle, clipboard in hand, smiling at the CEO, still ignoring seat 2A. Outside, the view shifted, golden. Sunlight over red earth, a city waking up. But what no one on board could see just yet was the motorcade gathering below. Rows of black SUVs. Military trucks, a presidential escort forming on the tarmac. Inside, passengers peered out windows. Whispers began. "Soldiers? Is something wrong? Are we landing into a war zone?" "No," someone said quietly. "This is military protocol. Someone important must be arriving." The CEO grinned. "Must be for me," he said smugly to Claire. She giggled and prepared to escort him personally through the terminal, but the plane hadn't even fully stopped when the cabin atmosphere changed. Outside the windows, soldiers, dozens of them, armed, aligned, standing at full attention. Behind them, a row of ministers, the defense minister, the foreign minister, the head of national security, all waiting in the heat like statues. Claire peeked through a window and gasped. "What is this?" The CEO straightened his tie. "Told you," he said. "Big projects." Then, before anyone could stand, a tall officer in a black beret stepped onto the aircraft. His boots echoed down the aisle, each step deliberate. He stopped at 2A. With a sharp salute, he said, "Mr. President, welcome home." The cabin fell silent. You could hear the engines ticking. Claire's face went white. Her clipboard slipped slightly in her hands. The CEO took a step back, his mouth open. President? Traore rose slowly, calm, dignified. Not a word spoken. Another officer stepped in, this time addressing Claire and the CEO. His tone was cold. Official. "You two. You will come with us." Claire blinked. "Wait, what? Why me?" "You are being detained for questioning," the officer said firmly. "You publicly disrespected the head of state on national soil. That is a serious offense." I was just doing my job," Claire stammered, laughing nervously. "This has to be a mistake." But no one listened. President Ibrahim Traoré stepped off the plane and was greeted by his ministers, security detail, and cheering citizens behind the airport fence. Cameras clicked. Flags waved. The president had returned. But this time, the world knew what had happened. He had walked among them as a regular man, and those who had judged him by appearance would now face consequences. Back on the tarmac, Claire and the CEO were escorted away in handcuffs, the smugness gone, replaced by disbelief, confusion, and fear. They were led into separate black SUVs, surrounded by elite guards. No one spoke to them, not even the soldiers. The silence was louder than any shouting. It was the silence of dignity being reclaimed, of power speaking for itself. Inside the terminal, President Ibrahim Traoré stepped before the press. He spoke softly, without anger. But when President Ibrahim Traoré finally spoke, his words cut like a blade, clear, calm, and unforgettable. "In Burkina Faso, we don't measure a man's worth by his skin. We don't bow to money or to the ghosts of colonial habits. Here, we honor dignity, humanity, and our people. That is the new Africa." The story exploded. Leaked videos flooded the internet, clips of the presidential guards saluting him, the CEO being escorted off the plane like a scolded schoolboy, and the shocked faces of passengers watching it all unfold. Social media ignited. Respect Africa. And Marie Stand with Burkina trended globally within hours. Young Africans across the continent rejoiced. In markets, cafes, dorm rooms, and city streets, people celebrated. They weren't just witnessing a news story. They were witnessing a shift, a moment they'd remember for the rest of their lives. At the Ministry of Justice in Ouagadougou, charges were filed swiftly and publicly. Claire, the flight attendant, and the French CEO were formally charged with public insult and discrimination against the head of state, disrespect on Burkina soil, abuse of power, attempted intimidation. The French embassy scrambled to intervene. Calls were made. Letters sent, diplomatic channels activated, but President Traoré's response was firm and simple. This is not a colony. This is a sovereign nation. They will face justice, just like anyone else. Meanwhile, Air France scrambled for damage control. Within 24 hours, they issued a corporate apology, stiff, vague, and dripping in legal caution. Words like regret and incident were tossed around, but there was no accountability. It fell flat. Burkina citizens weren't having it. Calls for a national boycott surged. Across West Africa, solidarity grew. Other countries began speaking out, some even reconsidering their ties with the airline. Back in the detention center, on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, Claire broke down in tears during questioning. "I didn't know who he was," she cried. "I was just following procedures." The investigator didn't flinch. "You didn't need to know who he was. You just needed to treat him like a human being." As for the CEO, he tried everything. He called contacts in Paris, pulled strings, waved business connections around like golden keys, But the Burkina court made its stance crystal clear. No immunity, no special treatment. Let justice be equal, and through it all, Traore never gloated. He never mocked them, never addressed the incident again with anything more than silence. Instead, he returned to the presidential palace and to the work that truly mattered. Building roads, empowering youth, strengthening the military, protecting the land. But what happened on that plane became legend. A quiet man in a hoodie, a flight attendant, guided by prejudice, a CEO blinded by ego, and a landing that rewrote everything, not just for one country, but for a continent tired of being underestimated.